Comfortable shoes.
Well, there are those of us who say middle age is 30 to 60, so.
Right, yeah.
Things change.
Yeah. Yeah, well, having delayed fertility to 37, I'm certainly feeling my years at this point. I have a toddler who still gets up and phone. So anyone have any questions?
Where do you live now?
Where do I live? I live in London.
Oh, nice.
In the East End. My wife's British. She works at Channel 4. So I moved out there in '06 to be the European director of EFF. And then when I, or no, in '03 rather. And then when I quit my job in '06, I stayed there because I was seeing my wife at that point and so on. And then we actually moved to LA not long thereafter. I had a Fulbright at the University of Southern California for a year. We went to LA. My wife was working for the BBC then, and she was able to switch over to their Burbank office. And we kind of thought about staying, but she got pregnant, and we were like, do we really want to have a baby without the benefit of the National Health Service? So we decided no. She had it was crazy. She had like $10,000 worth of healthcare coverage for prenatal care through ViiV, and we blew it all in the first 3 months at Cedars-Sinai. I mean, it was incredible. I mean, partly it was like I walked in and they said, hello, Mr. Doctorow, tell me about your ethnic origin. I said, well, I'm your basic Ashkenazi. And they said, oh, Ashkenazi! Well, do we have some genetic tests for you? Those will be $300 each, and there's 10 of them. And the consequences of not having them start with brain outside of body and go downhill from there. So,
Is she Ashkenazi also?
no, she's not. So, but she doesn't know exactly her ethnic origin. So, it was one of those things where it was like they were like, better safe than sorry, and you are insured, right? So, anyway, so we went back to London, and it was completely wicked because we got back. Talk about night and day. We got back. We went to our doctor's office. The doctor looked at my wife's round tum and said, I certify that you are pregnant, you can leave now. From now on, a midwife will visit you at your home at your convenience anytime between 7 a.m. and 9 p.m. twice a week until you give birth, and then thereafter for 2 months. And boy, it was completely awesome. And the midwife, who was this lovely roly-poly Scottish lady, walked in and said, I think you should have it at home. And we said, but what if things go wrong? And she said, actuarially, you have a lower chance of having something go catastrophically wrong at home than you do of being hit by a car on any random adventure outside your house. So we had baby at home in a pool. It was awesome. Yeah. The baby has a really long name. She is Poesy Emmeline Fibonacci Nautilus Taylor Doctorow. I lobbied for the third, and that was completely overruled. Initially, she was going to be Pepper Tyrannosaurus Taylor Doctorow, which has, among its many virtues, the fact that if you write it all in lowercase, her initials are ambigram. They're the same upside down, and writes it up PTTD. But I was, again, overruled. Also, Yoda was overruled. Sarge was overruled. What?
You need to work harder.
Although her first word was Chewbacca. Very, very proud of it. So we have Star Wars bath toys, and we were in the bath, and I said, Cozy, who's this? And she went, Chewbacca!
They make Star Wars bath toys.
They do make some pretty kick-ass Star Wars bath toys. Yeah. So I think the basic format is I'm going to read you a brief excerpt for makers, and then we'll take some questions, and I'll sign some books. So, we'll wait another 6 minutes or so until the appointed hour. Any other questions?
You do Boing Boing, right?
Yeah, I do Boing Boing.
Is it just you or are there other people?
No, there's 3 other co-editors who are the kind of senior editorial staff, and then we have 3 freelancers who work with us and do a few pieces every week. But 4 of us are kind of the core group. It was actually started by a guy named Mark Brownlow and his wife Carla Sinclair's print magazine. And I used to sell it in the 80s when I worked in a bookstore. And it was one of the casualties of the great distributorship collapse in the late 80s, where this distributor that distributed all the indie zines, and was the reason that, if you remember, there was this golden age in the late 80s where you could walk into any bookstore and find 200 zines from across the country. It was this one distributor, and of course they went bankrupt, and they took all the zine publishers with them because they were holding on to inventory, which was not, they're only secure creditors of the banks, not the people who'd given the books on magazines on consignment. So they sold all those magazines that they hadn't paid for yet to pay the bankers, And then so like, and they often owed magazine publishers a lot of money. So a common story would be like, the distributor owes me $30,000, and they have $30,000 worth of magazine, and it's my hobby, and you know it's been financed out of my pocket. And like when the distributor goes under, everybody folded. So it kind of went dormant for a couple of years. And Mark went to work for Wired and then for the Industry Standard. He was writing a piece for the Standard about Blogger, and he started boing as a blog to see what Blogger was like. This was when Blogger had just launched. And then he kind of wrote a post a week for about a year. And he asked me to sit in for a week while he was abroad. And when he came back, he asked me to stay. And then we brought in a couple more people, and it just kind of stuck. And so now it's what it is.
So you never worked on paper versions?
Never worked on the
Because
paper. I was like
looking through my
18.
paper copies too.
No, I was like
Yeah,
18.
you signed one.
Although Marcus got all those PDFs now, he's kind of figured out where they all were and like pulled them off of old zip cartridges and stuff. And we're going to figure out something to do with them, maybe a Lulu book or something.
You guys should put them out.
Yeah, I really think so. I mean, I'd love to do them in like some kind of big artifacty form where like they were, I don't know, the covers were made out of like slabs of rock or something. You know, like big Toshin plus style, you know, but I don't know what we're exactly going to do. But something with them, for sure. I mean, definitely Creative Commons license them and stick them in the archive too, but something really nice and artifacty, I don't know, printed on calfskin or something. Vegan calfskin. I can't believe it's not organ meat.
Speaking of Lulu, did you consider partnering with a store like Harvard or some other that has a print-on-demand machine for your latest endeavors?
For with a little help for the short story collection, or for makers?
For the one that you're doing with
The POD thing. No, well, I haven't really. I don't know what their content management system is like. One of the problems with doing retail for that book. So for those of you who don't know, I'm doing a short story collection after this book that's going to be print on demand and digitally delivered, as well as like a bespoke hardcover printed on rag paper, hand bound, and you know there's only like 250 of those. But I want to do really cool print on demand stuff. Like I want to be able, if you send me a typo, to fix it in the next copy printed and put your name at the bottom of the page. And Lulu lets you do that. You can upload a file to Lulu and print a book 1 minute later. But if you're trying to put it into the what does Ingram call it? Ingram has their own print-on-demand system. Lightning Source. You put it in the Lightning Source, there's like a 3-week delay every time you, or like hiatus, anytime you update the build. And so obviously that wouldn't work. So I don't know what the espresso machines are like, but you know I'm not adverse to it. I'd be totally into it if they wanted to. Certainly I'm not going to like close it down or anything. I don't have an exclusive deal with Lulu. So yeah.
There's an anecdote going around about Ken Oletta and Sergey Brin, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Oletta has just done a book on Google.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just saw that.
And evidently he was interviewing Brin. Brin comes in on his roller skates. And,
attended by ladies throwing rose petals ahead of them or something.
more likely money.
Right.
And he says to Oletta, why don't you do this online for free? And Oletta goes, well, who's going to pay for my trips out here? Who's going to edit and who's going to do the index? And Brin just goes, okay, and they go off on some other subject. But I'm wondering, for me, off the top of my head, I could see that you could do this open source and you can get people online to index the book for you. I'm not sure what editors are really good for, because in my experience, they don't.
Depends on the editor. I mean, this book benefited from having a great editor. In fact, all my novels have really benefited specifically from my editor, Patrick Nielsen Hayden, who's a great editor. And what he's really good at, I have a new unified field theory of science fiction, which is that science fiction is always two stories: the story of the world and the story of the person. So it's like a macro scale and a micro scale. And the micro scale is like, it's got a lot of torque because it's got to turn the world. And science fiction generally fails when the teeth on those two gears don't mesh. When the micro scale is not a microcosm, when the personal story is not a good microcosm for the world you set up. And so what Patrick is really good at is looking at a book and going, here's the 3 things that will make the micro scale and the macro scale line up. And it's always been incredibly, really good, highly efficient edits. Change these 3 things and this book will be much, much better, and he's always been right. So in some cases, I think editors help. some cases, obviously, they make things worse. I think, you know, like, it's pretty clear to me from looking at the author's preferred text of things like the Heinlein novels that he benefited immeasurably from an editor.
Can I interrupt?
Yeah, is it
All right.
time?
Yeah, it's time.
Excellent.
It's 7. All right, so because we're being recorded tonight, I'm going to do the official intro, and then you guys can have him back. Good evening. My name is Rachel Cass, and on behalf of Harvard Bookstore, I'm delighted to welcome you to this evening's event with Cory Doctorow, who will be discussing his new novel, Makers. Even though the holiday season is almost upon us, frighteningly, we still have a number of really exciting events coming up this season. Tickets are on sale for this Wednesday's discussion with Obama's campaign manager, David Plouffe, whose new book, The Audacity to Win, chronicles the campaign from primary to presidency. Mr. Plouffe will be speaking Wednesday evening at First Parish Church at 7 p.m., and $5 tickets are on sale now. We also have $5 tickets available now for our event on December 3rd with publishing legends Harold Evans and Jason Epstein, who have each written memoirs about their lives in the industry, as well as our December 7th event with the entire cast of America's Test Kitchen, who will discuss the show and the new comprehensive cookbook featuring every recipe demonstrated on the show during their 10 seasons. Yeah, they won't talk about every recipe, don't worry. For more information about these and other upcoming events, please visit us online at harvard.com, where you can also sign up for our weekly email newsletter. And now I'm very pleased to welcome to the store Cory Doctorow. Cory is a science fiction novelist, journalist, blogger, and technology activist. He's a co-editor of the technology blog Boing Boing and contributes to numerous publications, including Wired Magazine, the New York Times Sunday Magazine, the Boston Globe, Asimov Science Fiction Magazine, among others. His books include novels, short story collections, and nonfiction, his most recent being the best-selling novel Little Brother, for which he was awarded the Prometheus Award, the Sunburst Award, and the John W. Campbell Memorial Award. His new novel, Makers, takes us on an imaginary but completely imaginable future where inventions like 3D printers and an economic system dubbed New Work, a sort of New Deal for a technologically advanced era, wreak unexpected and unintended consequences on society. A review in BBC's Focus magazine says, "In a fable of all our tomorrows, Doctorow brilliantly shows us a near future that's equally wondrous, inspiring, and terrifying." After this evening's talk, we will have time for questions, followed by a signing here at the front. As always, I'd like to thank anyone who purchases a copy of the book here this evening. By doing so, you're supporting both a local independent bookstore as well as this author series. And now join me in welcoming again, Cory Doctorow.
So you've just heard the kind of basic premise of Makers, and I'm going to read you a little bit of it right from early on. The premise basically is the economy is in tatters. No one knows what to do with these big old rusting companies that have no sales but are sitting on substantial assets that are dwindling away through their infrastructure, supporting factories that makes things that nobody wants to buy anymore. And some Silicon Valley venture capitalists buy them out, liquidate them, turn their capital into microfinance for garage inventors, with the idea that they'll give you 10 grand, you invent something cool, 6 weeks later it will have been cloned and you have to invent something else, but you'll have made 20 grand in the interim. And so these Silicon Valley folks have recruited a woman named Andrea Fleeks, who's a reporter for for the San Jose Mercury News, to go to Florida, meet one of these teams. She's just turned up and they're giving her the tour of their factory, which is in a dead mall that was never in fact fully built, which has been turned into a junkyard and now lately turned into a workshop. Perry gestured with an arm deep into the center of the junk pile. "All right, check out this stuff as we go." He stuck his hand through an unglazed window of a never-built shop and plucked out a toy in a battered box. "I love these things," he said, handing it to her. She took it. It was a Sesame Street Elmo doll, labeled Boogie Woogie Elmo. "That's from the Great Elmo Crash," Perry said, taking back the box and expertly extracting the Elmo like he was shelling a nut. "The last and greatest generation of Elmoid technology, cast into an uncaring world that bought millions of little Tagger washable graffiti kits instead, after Rosie gave them 2 thumbs up on her Christmas shopping guide. Poor Elmo was an orphan, and every junkyard in the world has mountains of mint-in-package BWEs getting rained on, waiting to start their long, half-million-year decomposition. But check this out. He flicked a multi-tool off his belt and extracted a short, sharp scalpel blade. He slit the grinning disco-suited Elmo open from chin to groin and shucked its furry exterior and the foam tissue that overlaid its skeleton. He slid the blade under the plastic cover on its ass and revealed a little printed circuit board. "There's an entire atom processor on a chip there," he said. "Each limb and the head have their own subcontrollers. There's a high-powered digital to analog rig for letting him sing and dance to new songs, and an analog to digital converter array for converting spoken and danced commands to motion. Basically, you dance and sing for Elmo, and he'll dance and sing for you." Suzanne nodded. She'd missed that toy, which was a pity. She had a 5-year-old goddaughter in Minneapolis who would have loved a Boogie Woogie Elmo. They had come to a giant barn set at the edge of a story and a half's worth of anchor store. "This used to be where the contractors kept their heavy equipment," Lester rumbled, aiming a car door remote at the door, which squeaked and opened. Inside, it was cool and bright, the chugging air conditioners efficiently blasting purified air over the many work surfaces. The barn was a good 25 feet tall, with a loft and a catwalk circling it halfway up. It was lined with metallic shelves stacked neatly with labeled boxes of parts scrounged from the junkyard. Perry set Elmo down on a workbench and worked a miniature USB cable into his chest cavity. The other end terminated with a PDA with a small rubberized photovoltaic cell on the front. "This thing is running Install Party. It can recognize any hardware and build and install a Linux distro on it without human intervention." They used a ton of different suppliers for the BWE, so everyone is a little different, depending on who was offering the cheapest part on the day it was built. Install Party doesn't care, though. One click and away it goes. The PDA was doing all kinds of funny dances on its screen, montages of playful photoshopping of public figures matted into historical fine art. All done. Now, have a look. This is a Linux computer with some of the most advanced robotics ever engineered. No sweatshop stuff either. See this? That solder is too precise to have been done by hand. That's because it's from India. If it was from Cambodia, you'd see all kinds of wobble in the solder. That means tiny, clever hands were used to create it. And that means that somewhere in the device's karmic history, there's a sweatshop full of crippled children inhaling solder fumes until they keel over and are dumped in a ditch. But this is the good stuff. So we have this karmically clean robot with infinitely malleable computation and a bunch of robotic capabilities. I've turned these things into wall-climbing monkeys. I've modded them for a woman from the University of Miami at Jackson Memorial who used their capability to ape human motions in physiotherapy programs with nerve damage cases. But the best thing I've ever done for them with so far is the distributed Boogie Woogie Elmo motor vehicle operations cluster. "Come on," he said, and took off deeper into the barn's depths. They came to a dusty, stripped-down smart car, one of those tiny 2-seat electric cars that you could literally buy out of a vending machine in Europe. It was barely recognizable, having been reduced to its roll cage, drive chain, and control panel. A gang of naked robotic Elmos were piled into it. "Wake up, boys, time for a demo," Perry shouted, and they sat up and made canned, tinny Elmo, "oh boy," noises, climbing into position on the pedals, around the wheel, and on the gear tree. I got the idea when I was teaching an Elmo to play Mario Brothers. I thought it'd get a decent dig-dotting if I could get it to speedrun all of the first level using an old paddle I'd found and rehabilitated, and I was trying to figure out what to do next. The Dead Mall across the way is also a drive-in theater, and I was out front watching the silent movies, and one of them showed all these cute little furry animal whatevers collectively driving a car. It's a really old sight gag. I mean, like, racial memory old. I'd seen the little rascals do the same bit, with Alfalfa on the wheel and Buckwheat and Spanky on the brake and clutch and the doggy working the gear shift. And I thought, shit, I could do that with the Elmos. They don't have any networking capability, but they can talk and they can parse spoken commands, so all I need to do is designate one for left, and one for right, and one for fast, and one for slow, and one to be the eyes, barking orders, and they should be able to do this. And it works! They even adjust their balance and centers of gravity when the car swerves to stay upright at their posts. Check it out. He turned to the car. "Driving Elmos 10, hut?" They snapped upright and ticked salutes off their naked plastic noggins. "In circles, drive," he called. The Elmos scrambled into position and fired up the car, and in short order they were doing donuts in the car's little indoor pasture. "Elmos, halt!" Perry shouted, and the car stopped silently, rocking gently. "Stand down!" The Elmos sat down with a series of tiny thumps. Suzanne found herself applauding. "That was amazing," she said. "Really impressive. So that's what you're going to do for Kodacell, the companies they broke up to finance this were Kodak and Duracell. So that's what you're going to do for Kodacell? Make these things out of recycled toys?" Lester chuckled. "Nope, not quite. That's just for starters. The Elmos are all about the universal availability of cycles and apparatus. Everywhere you look, there's devices for free that have everything you need to make anything do anything. But have a look at part 2. Come here." He lumbered off in another direction, and Suzanne and Perry trailed along behind him. "This is Lester's workshop," Perry said, as they passed through a set of swinging double doors and into a cluttered wonderland. Where Perry's domain had been clean and neatly organized, Lester's area was a happy shambles. His shelves weren't orderly, but rather crammed with looming piles of amazing junk. Thrift store wedding dresses, plaster statues of bowling monkeys, box kites, knee-high tin knights in armor, seashells painted with American flags, presidential action figures, paste jewelry, and antique cough drop tins. "You know how they say a sculptor starts with a block of marble and chips away everything that doesn't look like a statue? Like he can see the statue in the block? I get like that with garbage. I see the pieces on the heaps and in roadside trash, and I can just see how it can go together, like this." He reached down below a work table and hoisted up a huge triptych made out of 3 hinged car doors, stood on end. Carefully, he unfolded it and stood it like a screen on the cracked concrete floor. The inside of the car doors had been stripped clean and polished to a high metal gleam that glowed like sterling silver. Spot welded to it were all manner of soda tins, pounded flat and cut into gears, chutes, springs, and other mechanical apparatus. "It's a mechanical calculator," he said proudly, "about half as powerful as a Univac. I milled all the parts using a laser cutter. What you do is, you fill this hopper with G.I. Joe heads, and this hopper with Barbie heads. Crank this wheel and it will drop a number of M&Ms equal to the product of the 2 values in this hopper here." He put 3 scuffed G.I. Joe heads in one hopper and 4 scrofulous Barbies in another and began to crank slowly. A music box beside the crank played a slow, irregular rendition of Pop Goes the Weasel, while hundreds of little coin-sized gears turned, flipping switches and adding and removing tension to springs. After the weasel popped a few times, 12 brown M&Ms fell into an outstretched rubber hand. He picked them out carefully and offered them to her. "It's okay, they're not from the trash," he said. "I buy them in bulk." He turned his broad back to her and heaved a huge galvanized tin wash tub full of brown M&Ms in her direction. "See? It's a bit bucket," he said. Suzanne giggled in spite of herself. "You guys are hilarious," she said. "This is really good, exciting, nerdy stuff." The gears on the mechanical computer were really sharp and precise. They looked like you could cut yourself on them. When they ground over the polished surfaces of the car doors, they made a sound like a box of toothpicks falling on the floor. Click, 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 click. She turned the crank until 12 more brown M&Ms fell out. "Who's the Van Halen fan?" Lester beamed. "Might as well jump, jump!" He mimed heavy metal air guitar and thrashed his shorn head up and down as though he were headbanging with a mighty mane of hairband locks. "You're the first one to get the joke," he said. "Even Perry doesn't get it." "Get what?" Perry said, also grinning. "Van Halen had this thing where if there were any brown M&Ms in their dressing room, they'd trash it and refuse to play. When I was a kid, I used to dream about being so famous that I could act like that much of a prick. Ever since, I've afforded great personal significance to brown M&Ms." She laughed again. Then she frowned a little. "Look, I hate to break this party up, but I came here because Kettlewell said that you guys exemplified everything that he wanted to do with Kodacell. The stuff you've done is all very interesting. It's killer art, but I don't see the business angle. So can you help me out here?" "That's step 3, Perry said. "Come here." He led her back to his workspace, to a platform surrounded by articulated arms terminated in webcams, like a grocery scale in the embrace of a metal spider. 3D scanner, he said, producing a Barbie head from Lester's machine and dropping it on the scales. He prodded a button and a nearby screen filled with a 3-dimensional model of the head, flattened on the side where it touched the surface. He turned the head over and scanned again, and now there were 2 digital versions of the head on the screen. He moused on over the other until they lined up. right-clicked a drop-down menu, selected an option, and then they were merged, rotating. All right. So we have some time for questions, and then I'll sign your books. Questions? Thinly veiled polemics disguised as questions. Yeah.
How did you get into 3D printers?
Hmm?
How did you get into 3D printers?
How did I get into 3D printers? Well, I actually started looking at them totally metaphorically, which is, I think, a grand tradition in science fiction. If you look at kind of the first generation of cyberpunk literature, it's really clear that computers are all metaphoric, right? Like, I think William Gibson is a genius and a treasure to the human race. But if I were designing a cyberspace deck, I'd put a circuit breaker in it. So it's really clear that those computers were absolutely metaphorical for other things, and they say as much. If you look at the kind of early days of cyberpunk, they said as much. And for me, 3D printers were kind of a metaphor about the panic about replication of digital goods. And specifically, they were sparked by an incident. I went and saw the head of the British Phonographic Institute, which is like the RIA here, give a talk about like the future to some inter-industry group that the British government had put on. And back when I worked for EFF, I had to put on a suit a lot and go to these things. And so I went and saw him speak, and he said, basically, you people from all you other industries, you think we're such idiots in the record industry because we sued all of our customers. You just wait, though. Someday, 3D printers are going to come, and then everything that you do that relies on patents or trademarks, you're going to be in the same position we're in because they're going to be printing this stuff at home, and you're not going to have any way to stop them, and you'll be suing them too, and you'll be in a panic. And on the way out, a friend of mine said, it's kind of interesting to hear someone from the record industry talking about 3D printing. I mean, that's pretty kind of futuristic, kind of forward-looking. And I said, yeah, but he thinks the major impact of 3D printing is going to be trademark infringement? Like, what about printing AK-47s, right? Or like sarin? So, it struck me that this was like such a parochial view of what the main impact of 3D printers and kind of general fabrication, distributed fabrication was going to be. It was kind of like, I thought at the time it would be like looking at the railroad and going, man, those guys who sew oat bags for horses are in trouble. And it's like absolutely true that like oat bags for horses kind of dwindled after the advent of the railroad, but anyone who thought that was like the major impact of the railroad really wasn't paying attention. So that was like kind of where I started. And then I went off and did a lot of reading about 3D printers and went and saw a bunch of 3D printers and kind of played with some 3D printers and kind of watched that field. But it really started with thinking about 3D printers as a metaphor for just kind of what happens when distribution of and instantiation of physical objects starts to look more digital. Yeah?
How's For the Wind coming?
How's For the Wind coming? Well, it's done, is how it's coming. Apparently there's advanced review copy galleys waiting for me in New York tomorrow. For the Wind's my next novel. It's a young adult novel. It's an expansion of my short story, Anda's Game. It's about hacker kids who form a trade union under the auspices of a newly reborn industrial workers of the world, or Wobblies. They call themselves the industrial workers of the World Wide Web, or Weblies. They work mostly in China and India, and they form a trade union using video games that their bosses can't surveil them in. They begin by unionizing gold farmers and spread out to unionize people who work in factories. And they have to fight Pinkertons who both show up at the workplace with like chains and crowbars, but also who show up in game as orcs with giant swords. It's done. It was finished on 1 month late on September the 1st, and everybody likes it who's read it so far. My mom says I'm very handsome. It'll be the first book that both my British and my American editor worked on. This book, Makers, is the first one that came out both in the UK and the US simultaneously, but I'd already written it when I sold it to my British publisher. So it's kind of interesting getting edited by two different editors at the same time, but it's going pretty good too. They just sent me a set of digital galleys, and they said, you have 9 days for any corrections to go in the first edition. I'm like, you just put me on tour, right? And that tour overlaps the 9 days, right? And they were like, yeah, we've got a production schedule. So. Other questions? In the back first. Yeah?
Do you ever plan on writing a book where you don't have to feel terrible for all the characters?
Do I ever plan on writing a book where you don't have to feel terrible for all the characters? Probably not, because my basic plotting technique is you start with a person in a place with a problem and then you make things get worse. And even though that person is trying to solve her or his problem, things just keep getting worse. I mean, it's basically, that's dramatic tension, and that's how you get to a climax. So yeah, the characters are always going to be in trouble. It would be kind of a slow-moving story if everybody was happy. Be thankful I'm not Jonathan Carroll, who I'm just looking at his Ghost in Love behind your head there, who's a wonderful writer whose special gift is to spend 2/3 of the book telling you how happy and wonderful the lives are of some people who are really wonderful and that you love very much, and who spends the last third irredeemably crushing them. Follows that theme. I mean, he's a wonderful writer, and that's a particularly good book of his, but holy moly, does reading his books make me want to go into lie down in a warm tub and open a vein. Yeah.
I heard part of your interview on WBAI, and you were talking about the open source production and
yeah, that's my next book. That's my short story collection.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so this is this book I'm going to do. I talked about it a little before the reading. I'm going to do the short story collection where it's a free audiobook, free digital book, 4 different covers on a print-on-demand book that you can order through Lulu, and I may do some deals with print-on-demand stores depending on how that works out. And then also some bespoke hardcovers that are hand-bound in London near my office. And I'm going to publish all of the finances and hours. I'm keeping a timesheet for it as an appendix to the book that will be bound into the book every month because it's print on demand, so I can change the book every month. And it's got I'm doing a bunch of different things with it, soliciting donations, selling ads. I sold a commission. Mark Shuttleworth from the Ubuntu Project commissioned a story called Epoch about the decommissioning of the first AI on the grounds that no one ever found anything to do with it on the eve of the 32-bit Unix rollover. Yeah.
My understanding is the brown M&Ms were in the contract for a very particular.
The brown M&Ms, yeah. There was a good reason for the brown M&Ms, which is basically they were like page 23 of a 27-page rider. Almost everything on the rider was something really important, like electrical equipment that ensured the band wasn't electrocuted on stage. And what they could do is they could tell if you'd read the rider all the way through if there were any brown M&Ms in the bowl. And so it was like sticking a hair to the 17th page of your term paper to see if the prof reads it all the way through, or reversing one page in a manuscript or whatever is your basic tripwire.
Recently I saw William Kamkwamba. And William Kamkwamba is a kid from Malawi who built his own windmill out of junkyard parts. And Boing Boing has covered Maker Faire in Africa. And I've actually underwritten a student at the University of Nairobi to do a little bit of work on a bicycle cell phone charger, and trying to get in contact with other people in Africa who are doing that. And it seems to me that this maker culture, I mean, there's a Dorkbot meeting tomorrow night here in Somerville and so forth and so on. And this idea of open source hardware taken worldwide can be a very, 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 very powerful and decentralizing movement. And I'm wondering if you get into that in some of in detail.
Yeah, Makers does get into some of that. I mean, basically, I think that we're you know what really turned me on to this was Natalie Jeremijenko's feral wireless dogs project, where she teaches undergraduate engineering students, and every year she goes out and buys a huge bag of novelty robot dogs at Toys R Us from various countries, and she brings them back. She has her students take them apart, and she's the one where I got this thing checking for the solder, because she actually longitudinally logs child labor conditions in various factory states around the world by making a note of whether the solder is robotic or hand done year on year and noting the nation of manufacture. So she has pretty good charts about the actual facts on the ground about labor conditions for children in lots of countries, mostly around the Pacific Rim. And then what they do is they program, they put in volatile organic compound sensors and program PLCs so that they'll follow concentration gradients, and then put in better drivetrains so they can go off-road. And they take them to Superfund sites that have been supposedly cleaned up, and they release them. And like the EPA Superfund cleanup site survey is like a 4-meter accurate survey, and these things do 6-centimeter accurate surveys. And moreover, they're legible because, you know, like a guy in a lab coat who shows you a sheet of numbers and says, there are no toxic chemicals in this park, your children can play here again, you kind of have to take his word for it. But if a whole bunch of robotic dogs converge on a spot and kind of go like, this is, this will visit you unto 3 generations if you let your children play here. It's very legible. And the thing that's cool about it is that the project involves people all over the world because these robot dogs are exported everywhere, right? I mean, the same factories export the same basic designs everywhere. So figuring out how to mod any given model of robot dog is like a problem that you can participate in with lots of other people. The other area where I think it's really, where something really interesting is happening globally is in the general trend to using packages from universally available consumer packaged goods as chassis for devices, starting with things like the Pringles can cantenna. And the signal advantage of this is not, the Pringles can cantenna has lots of things that make it a less than ideal antenna. But one thing that makes it very, very good is that the packaging is pretty standardized, and so you can do like diagrams for like where to put the holes based on the packaging. So like one goes through his left eye, one goes through the cholesterol count, one goes through the 3rd digit in the UPC, and you get a very standardized build everywhere you go, and you can make improvements, and you can promulgate those improvements, and other people can test them out too. So it's very kind of enlightenment-y, replicatable, peer-review-y kind of way of doing engineering, and definitely it's this very lightweight way of collaborating around the world is advancing this stuff very quickly. Yeah.
So this was, I guess, originally written in 2005.
Yeah.
This was.
Yeah.
But it's definitely been updated because I've read only the first chapter. But she mentions tweeting day and this and that. So can you talk about a little bit where this book has come from and how it's been now published?
Yeah, sure. So it started off as a parable of the .com collapse, where I'd lived in San Francisco. I moved there in '99, right at the peak of the boom. I mean, it was crazy. Like there was a guy. I lived in a half of an illegal sublet, and there was a guy in the backyard that my bedroom overlooked who was living in a Sears shed for $900 a month. He was like an executive. And this was the only place he could find to live, and he took it because it came with a parking spot, and he had nowhere else to park his Jag, basically. It was insane, right? So, he didn't even have a toilet. I don't know where he went. And then kind of overnight, it tanked, right? It was like last year, right? There was this huge sucking sound. All the money just kind of vanished from the city. And in some ways it was kind of pleasant because all of a sudden, you didn't have to live in a Sears shed. But it was also kind of catastrophic because there were people, literally you'd walk down the street and there'd be some guy in 50 Aeron chairs and he'd be like, make an offer. And the interesting thing was that the people who stayed behind afterwards kept doing stuff. That was the really interesting thing to me. It was like How the Grinch Stole Christmas. You can take away all the Christmas decorations, you take away the Aeron chairs, take away the foosball tables, take away the baristas, take away the weekly massages, and it turns out that all you need to invent kind of what we're calling Web 2.0 these days is someone's Wi-Fi and a laptop. And that's more or less what happened, right? And moreover, they did it without the expectation of getting enormous, gigantic amounts of money. And so they did really interesting things because no one was sitting there breathing down their neck going, I just invested $50 million in you on a valuation of 250. I'm expecting to cash out at 10x in the next 18 months. What are you doing to get me there, right? So they had a lot of creative freedom too. And so I wrote it, the first chunk was serialized on Salon under the title Theme Punks. And then it kind of, I worked on it and I worked on some other stuff. I really hit a roadblock in it. I couldn't get any further. And I wrote Little Brother in kind of 8 weeks to take a breather from it. And then I went back to it and finished it. And still didn't have a real title for it. I came up with the title last November while I was on my honeymoon. So it's so the title was very late bound to the text. That's what global search and replace is good for. And in terms of the updating, it was pretty light. I kind of did one pass through and just updated it here and there. It's it's a parable. It's not a prediction, so it doesn't need to be super au fait with whatever it is that we're all writing about this month in the business pages. All that stuff will be forgotten in 2 years anyway.
Well, I noticed Rosie's already collapsed.
Rosie's already collapsed. That's right. Yeah, that's one of the things that makes it a counterfactual future history. Yeah.
You said you wrote Little Brother in 8 weeks.
Yeah.
Did you do anything else?
Yeah, in fact, I did. It was kind of a busy time, which was the weird thing. I was traveling a lot. I remember I went to the iCommons Summit in Rio, and I wrote 9,000 words in coach on the plane overnight. It was a bit of a slog, that book. It was like or whatever the reverse of a slog, quick march. It was like I say it was like passing a pineapple.
Kenny must macho.
And there were days when I had to stop typing because it just hurt too much to keep typing. So it was pretty weird. My wife's very, very patient because I wrote the last chapter. I got up at 4 a.m. in our hotel room in Rome on our anniversary and wrote the last chapter while she slept next to me. So she's a very, very patient lady. Yeah.
If you can, without spoilers,
Yeah.
where was the break where you wrote Little Brother in Makers?
Oh gosh, I don't even know where the break was anymore. I would be able to tell you now because I do this great thing with my fiction now that Thomas Gideon, who runs the Command Line podcast, wrote for me. I archived my papers with the Merrill Collection in Toronto. It's a great science fiction reference library. They were bemoaning the fact that they used to, with the writers whose manuscripts they archived, they would get multiple drafts, right? First draft, second draft, third draft. But there really isn't a series of drafts anymore. There's just like, you finish the book and then you modify the file until it goes to press, really. And they said, now we have no history of books, and because it's so hard to keep track of changes to a digital file. And I went, wait a second, it's not hard to keep track of changes to a digital file. We solved that problem with like CVS, right? So I asked my friend Thomas Gideon, could you write me some Perl scripts that would just look at all my active working files, which are all text files anyway, and check them into Git, a local Git repository, which is a version control repository. And so he did, and he actually did one better. He was like, well, you need some context for this, so you'll know later what you were thinking of when you wrote that paragraph. So he put in the last 3 songs in my music player, the last 3 boing boing posts with my byline, the weather where I'm at based on my geolocated IP address, my location based on my geolocated IP address. And it's a plugin architecture, it's all GPL'd, it's on GitHub, it's called Flashbake. So now I could, because now I can actually tell you like to a very fine nicety exactly what was going on when I was writing it. And I figured like 5 years from now I'll look back on that corpus and I'll start doing some data mining on it and start figuring out, oh, this song makes me write like a demon or something. and maybe be able to build on that. Yeah.
And you get sort of these fleets of little robots scurrying around. As you say, they can be turned to good purposes like toxic waste dumps or maybe finding landmines. But do you see the ability of the average person to make these little things and have them from home, having some really evil potential and having them weaponized? The military's working on that, but what if every man works on it?
Yeah, so here's what I think, is that technology favors attackers in general. If you want to defend a city with earthworks, you need to build a perfect wall. If you want to attack a city with earthworks, you need to find one imperfection and undermine it. And so what that means is that a society characterized by rapid technological change is one in which the status quo never holds, which is kind of bad news for people who like the status quo and pretty good news for people who suffered under the status quo. But in general, our capacity to stabilize the status quo is all about the individual and the collective's capacity to use technology to correct the negative effects of technology. So for example, a few years ago I was hanging out with a guy named Bunny Wang who got his degree at MIT. Some of you maybe went to school with him. He's the guy who started Chumby. Bunny's a radio engineer. And we were talking about software-defined radios, in particular about FCC notice of proposed rulemaking on software-defined radios that was seeking comment on whether or not software-defined radios should be built out of trusted computing, so that users couldn't load their own code into a software-defined radio and change it from, say, a mobile phone into an air traffic control radio, right? Because obviously there's some potential for mischief there. And we concluded a couple of things after talking about it. The first one was that an FCC rule that says you're not allowed to turn your mobile phone into air traffic control system and crash planes wouldn't stop people who wanted to crash planes. They tend not to be intimidated by FCC rules. And second of all, that really the only way that you could effectively locate and shut down people whose radios were rogue, either because of bad code or because of malicious code or because of errors or because of some other factor, some unforeseen complication, would be for everybody to be able to detect those bad operators in the spectrum and geolocate them and collaborate to geolocate them. And if you took away everyone else's SDRs and just gave them to the bad guys, then you'd have to kind of rely on the very limited resources of the FCC to hunt down and shut down bad emitters. You know, kind of if SDRs are outlawed, only outlaws will have SDRs. So I kind of think that, like, if we're going to stop people from building, you know, I don't know, autonomous roving slow bombs out of modded robot dogs that used to bark the national anthem but now carry a payload of sarin and plastique or something, then the only way we're going to do that is if we also have access to the same technology that made that possible. That everything short of that kind of leaves us vulnerable and dependent on a less responsive state that's always going to be playing catch up, that's always going to be trying to defend the status quo. And so I know that's not like a super great answer, but it's one of those realpolitik things where, like, it's the best of several bad answers. And the good answer is, the good news about it is that we can also do all kinds of really awesome stuff with widespread cheap technology. Yeah.
So I've heard you speak on a number of occasions about that kind of citizen policing, more cheaper technologies. But I was just wondering, do you think that a lot of the regulatory agencies that we have right now are based on this idea that the actors in the industrial society are all $100 billion targets that you can very easily locate and punish, especially because they have vested interest in the status quo? Do you think that there's any changes to the regulatory structure overall, the actual government and not citizen government, that are going to come as a result of this kind of maker revolution insofar as there is such a thing?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think one of the things that regulation has always striven to do is make tank mines, not land mines, right? So you want to make regulations that only go off when you drive over them with a $100 billion corporation and that leave individuals alone, right? So you don't need to file like with the SEC when you take a friend out to lunch, even though there's money changing hands, right? It's just like it's sub-regulatory. And, you know, obviously one of the copyright crises is that we trigger copyright, which is an industrial regulation, when someone makes a copy on the grounds that copying used to require, you know, a record plant, recording plant, or a film reproduction plant. And so it made a certain amount of sense to assume that everyone who would make a copy would have access to a specialist attorney who would analyze the copying and make sure it was lawful, and it no longer makes sense. We kind of turned it into a landmine. And I suppose that this is probably a motif that will continue in other areas. You know, software-defined radio being probably a pretty good example, because, you know, the FCC says, well, if you're going to make a radio, you need to, and for manufacture, you need to ratify its characteristics through the regulator. The regulator has to look at it, make sure that it doesn't do anything bad, and then certify it before you can put it into production. But with software-defined radio, does anyone not know what software-defined radio is? I mean, it sounds more or less like what it is, right? It's radio whose characteristics aren't determined by crystal; they're determined by software. The technical workings of it aren't important here. But if you can change a radio by changing its code, all of a sudden the FCC is in a position of regulating which software you can upload to the internet, which is a completely different regulatory place for it to be in. And if it asserts that jurisdiction, it's kind of hard to know where that stops, right? I mean, first of all, code can take a lot of forms. My friend Seth Schoen once wrote the DCSS code in a form of a series of haiku. So, you know, you're now in a position of regulating stuff that can be pretty variegated, and also where in order to do so, you're going to have to make an incursion into something that no one's ever had to make incursions into before. So I don't know. It will be. That's an interesting, sticky puzzle that I will look forward to watching with some interest. Yeah.
Talk about how much work it is to write a book in Ohio, but after you put all that work into it, do you find it hard to release a book under a Creative Commons license?
Do I find it hard to release a book under CC once I put all the hard work into a book? No, not at all. I mean, first of all, I think that it sells more books, right? So, I mean, I'm glad to get the extra money of a CC release, but also, you know, artistically, I find it very satisfying to make art that's intended to be copied in the 21st century, because it's the century of copying, right? Copying's not going to get harder this century unless we have a nuclear war. Hard drives aren't going to get more expensive and bulkier. The general capacity of the public to operate computers will not decline. Networks aren't going to get more expensive and harder to access. I mean, you know, from here on in, it just gets easier. So, like, there is a certain romance in being the blacksmith at Pioneer Village, But you know, I'm a science fiction writer. I'm supposed to be making at least contemporary, if not futuristic art. And so making contemporary art that's not supposed to be copied, to me, it just doesn't make any sense. So yeah, like I derive an enormous amount of satisfaction. That plus the fact that, you know, I'm an avid copyist. Everyone I know is an avid copyist. Running around and telling people that they shouldn't copy things while I'm copying my head off just feels like, you know, corrosive hypocrisy to me. You know, I always say if it wasn't for mixtapes, my entire adolescence would have been celibate. You know. So. Yeah.
So if this book is more parable than prediction, there's going to be a battle over micromanufacturing and 3D printers.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you think the lines are being drawn?
There's going to be a battle over micromanufacturing and 3D printers. Where will the battle lines be drawn? Okay, here's what I think is that its characteristics will be weirder than we can imagine, right? I don't actually have a prediction except to say that all the things that I can think of are probably not weird enough to be the thing that will be the big fight. In the same way that kind of in 1992, looking at, you know, Yahoo's homepage and predicting Facebook suicide pacts would have been extremely difficult. You know, there's this old aphorism that the job of the science fiction writer is to look at the movie theater and the automobile and predict the drive-in, which seems to me to be very simple, right? And then some people said, oh no, the job is to predict the sexual revolution, and that seems to me to be very simple. I think, like, if you want to be like a great predictive science fiction writer, you should look at the automobile and look at the movie theater and say, we will have drive-ins which will incentivize children to get driving licenses, which will mean that for the first time citizens of Western democracies will routinely carry photo ID, and in 25 years we'll have a surveillance state. Like, that's a really good, subtle, weird prediction that looks at some major social issues that will arise that are kind of hard to predict as second-order effects in major technology. I don't know what they're going to be. I think at least one will be over goop, though. We'll certainly have a kind of, I made a printer with proprietary goop. You figured out how to load it. Literally, there's someone who's loading their printers. Maybe it's at MIT, loading printers with weight gain powder from protein shakes.
Sugar,
which apparently
yeah.
costs 1/50th of what the proprietary goop costs, but works just as well.
Yep.
And eventually someone's going to go, you know, like, well, I sold it to you at below cost in the expectation that you'd be buying consumables, and you figured out how to make consumables more cheaply, and now, you know, I'm going to sue you or shut you down or, you know, make my goop even more fiendishly proprietary or, you know, whatever it will be. I think we'll certainly get some of that. Yeah.
Publishing other Creative Commons, do you get a lot of feedback from your readers, or do you anticipate getting a lot of feedback for the new print-on-demand book?
Feedback in what sense? Like, I liked your book?
In how you could have, in what they thought of the book, or fan fiction stories, or alterations that they think you could have made to the book.
Yeah, so I get both of those. I get a lot of lovely mail from people, and the occasional not so lovely mail, but mostly it's lovely. And then, yeah, people do all kinds of crazy stuff with my books. A lot of translations, which is really interesting because Little Brother is the first book to get really widely translated. The other ones have had 3 or 4 languages, but Little Brother is in 16 more languages apart from English now, either out or pending. And some of those languages, there's already fan translations in them, and so I'm like mediating with a foreign publisher who doesn't speak English via my agent's foreign rights sub-agent to explain Creative Commons to them, which is always fun. So far they've been really cool about it, but it's always a little touchy at first. You know, sometimes like I'll get an email like in very broken English that has been run through Google Translate that says, you know, dear Mrs. Doctorow, I am your Italian publisher. Did you know that they've stolen your book and translated it into Italian? And I'll have to like write back and go, no, it's okay. And then yeah, there's some fanfic, and there's certainly short videos and all kinds of other stuff that fans do. It's always great to see that stuff. Even when it's stuff that I like doesn't resonate for me, it's great to think that there's someone out there who found personal expression through looking at my stuff and reinterpreting it through their own filters. And sometimes the other thing that you sometimes see is stuff where it looks like, it looks like a group of people had a lot of fun making this thing, and maybe that the outcome isn't all that cool, but like you can see in the outcome that the process of making it, like a lot of fanfic, I think, follows this arc where the actual social practice of getting together with a bunch of people and rewriting a story to your own needs and with your own jokes and so on is incredibly fun. And you know, sometimes I've heard writers dismiss some of that fanfic as trivial because when it's done, it's not all that interesting to read. And I always say that's like judging a sex act by what's left behind on the sheets. You know, like the process. It's a process, not a destination, right? And so I really I'm always glad to see it. Yeah, totally. I mean, that was one of my fondest hopes. You know, I don't know any way to cement your fortune with a reader more firmly than to make your creative expression part of their creative expression. I mean, who wouldn't go on buying books by a writer who inspired them to write a piece of fan fiction or you know, paint a painting or whatever, you know? Yeah.
I know with Down and Out and a lot of your Boing Boing posts, a lot of them reflect on Disney and this kind of obsession or fascination at least with Disney World.
It's an obsession.
I have that exact same obsession. I grew up in Florida and I grew up there as a kid, so I just want to know where yours comes from.
Where does my obsession with Disney World come from? Well, I mean, I grew up going there too. My grandparents are snowbirds. They live in what my dad calls Cemetery Village, Century Village, in Deerfield Beach, and so I used to go for Christmas break every year. And there's not much to do in Cemetery Village when you're 9 years old. So we used to drive to Orlando every year and go to Disney World. So I totally grew up doing it, and it was always a big part of my childhood. In terms of why it makes an interesting piece for science fiction, there's a lot of reasons, actually. One is it's explicitly techno-utopian, right? Like Walt was like, oh, I know what I'll do. I'll build a city for 50,000 people built around advanced technology and write a social contract built around my own view of how the world should work and force everyone to adhere to it. I mean, that was the initial plan, right? They were going to put a dome over it. It's going to have its own GE reactor. It's going to have all electric cars. I mean, so it is explicitly techno-utopian in that way. It's also, in some ways, the opposite of the internet. So first of all, it's strongly location-based. It's difficult to replicate. It's difficult to copy. And it requires an enormous amount of explicit hierarchical coordination, right? So like doing a Disney thing requires kind of the opposite of ad hocs, like I wrote in my first book. Disney works because there's like a Steve Jobs figure in a turtleneck at the front going, the ride shall be thus. Right? You don't get to like fork Disney World and go, actually, I think that a better theme for this garbage can in New Orleans Square sorry, that's Disneyland, in Fantasyland would be to like paint it like this, right? Nobody gets to freelance Disney World. There is a central architect through whom all this stuff runs, right? It is so opposite to the internet in its appeal that it makes a great foil for an internet-driven era, right? It's like the funhouse mirror. The other thing about Disney is that while building Disney World today would probably cost like 120% of the capital that they put into Disney World today, because you'd have to do it and then you'd have to do some more to kind of catch up with them. Building a thing that's like sort of 20% as good as Disney World would probably cost like 10% of the capital that they put in. So getting kind of part of the way there is much cheaper than it's not linear. It doesn't scale in the same way. And I think that gap's going to narrow. I think, give it 15 years and you may be able to build a thing that's like 60% as good as Disney World for 30% of the money, and then they're going to freak out, right? It's going to be exactly what happened to the record labels. You can build a thing that's 10% as good as Warner for 1/10% of what it costs to capitalize Warner Records. And it turns out that there's a lot of people for whom 10% is good enough if you can do it for 1/10% of the capitalization. And so we have all these little people kind of springing up and doing interesting things that are kind of micro-financed, micro-audience, micro-records through micro-record labels for micro-musicians, right? And they're like, hey, this is okay by me because, while Warner has its virtues in terms of breaking big acts, 97% of the deal with a record deal from one of the majors earns $600 a year or less from it. So unless you're in that kind of statistically insignificant, far over the right-hand side of the curve mega act, you're not very well served by the system at all. So like, yeah, give me that 1/10% capitalization, 10% record label any day, right? So I think that's the thing that makes Disney World really interesting to me. That, and I really like the dark rides. Like seriously, like I think dark rides are an underappreciated art form, and nobody actually takes them seriously, with some exceptions except for Disney. I especially the kind of the pre-1975 dark rides, especially of course the Haunted Mansion, but many of them. Maybe one more question. Does that sound right? Yeah. Okay. Last question.
This is also about Down and Out at Disney. I'm wondering two things. If you did any behind-the-scenes tours as you were preparing for that book in terms of learning about the animatronics, or if you just picked that up. And two, if the rumors are true that a panel of Imagineers is going to sort of open the floor to a lot of design ideas to rework Epcot. Would you participate in that?
Ah, I've never heard that rumor.
I just heard it this week.
That's pretty awesome.
Sources, so now I'm kind of wondering if it's
So yeah,
play.
I did get some backstage tours, partly because it was back in those days you could buy a backstage tour. You could just show up and pay for a tour and they'd take you through the tunnels. But I had a PA at one point who was who'd been a summer worker or a student worker there, and she actually kept it up so that she could keep her staff discount. She was a total Disney nut, and so she would go and work 2 weeks every year so she could keep her staff discount. And at the time I'd just gotten that handspring with a little camera that fit in the top that didn't look like a camera, and no one had really seen PDAs with cameras yet, and you're not allowed to take photos backstage. And I said, like, do you think you could take a lot of pictures with this? And she was like, I could totally take pictures. So I have really extensive backstage photos from Disney World that I used as reference when I was writing it too. And then I just talked to a lot of people who work there. One of the not very well kept secrets of Disney World is that Thursday night, back in Pleasure Island days, Thursday night was cast member night. Pleasure Island was the island with all the bars. And so people who worked there got discounts at the bars, and you could go on Thursday night and look at all of the kind of the people who come in to work, not the people who were locals, but the people who come into work, which was a good 10, 20,000 of them, getting pissed and trying to screw each other. And you could overhear a lot of really good gossip on a Thursday night in the Adventurers Club. So.
That was a great club.
Yeah, it really was.
There's a rumor that they will move Adventurers Club to Disneyland.
Wow, that would kick ass.
And have it in the new California Adventure.
Wow, that's a great idea. So it sparked an idea for me. I want to someday, I'll open source this idea. I want to someday open a haunted hotel on Sunset Boulevard in LA. 12-room boutique hotel filled with haunted effects. So like when you're, half silvered mirror that just at random intervals when you're standing in front of it has some kind of, proximity sensor, just shines up a light on an illusion behind it that makes it look as though there's someone looking over your shoulder just for an instant.
Oh.
And like a web proxy that every now and again puts a face on your screen that goes, "Get out!" and like the bed, one of the beds levitates in the middle of the night. And I actually had this really elaborate idea for it at one point, where what I would do is I would model the entire hotel as a Quake level, and then I would fill the hotel with sensors, and the sensors would be used to move an avatar around the Quake level, and then I'd have monsters. And the monsters would control the effects. So if you inadvertently aggroed a monster, it would attack you as you move through the hotel, and as whatever room a monster was in, it could trigger that effect. So if you inadvertently aggroed the monster that lived in the breakfast room, it would follow you up the elevator and into your bedroom, and it would make this whatever, right? And it would have like an internal logic that would be the idea would be that if you paid enough attention, you could in fact figure out what was going on, right? Because those AIs aren't very smart. And it would have a kind of internal reasoning, and it kind of mirrors the idea of the spirit world, right? Where the spirit world can see you, but you can't sense it, and you don't know that you're kind of stepping on someone's grave, or that the monster is following you from room to room, except by these obscure signals through which it can make itself made. And I really got the idea from the Adventurers Club, which in turn is really kind of a lift from the Magic Castle in Los Angeles. If you ever know anyone who's a member and can get you in, it's really nice to go to the Magic Castle. You have to speak a password into an owl on a bookcase that slides aside to let you in. It's really cool. So I really like the Adventurers Club, and I really like the idea of doing that kind of anti-internet, physically instantiated, difficult to replicate, firmly location-based, non-virtual thing. I think that would be incredibly fun. All right, so I think that's it for Q&A. They have books to sell. I will find a writing implement, and I'm happy to say hello.
Thank you.
We do have copies of the book for sale at the register. We were talking a little bit earlier about print on demand, so I encourage you to check out our print on demand machine in the first room on your way out. It's super cool. And have a wonderful evening. Thank you all for coming.